Life in the Florida Everglades has always been full of mysteries, endless stretches of swamps, twisting mangroves, and creatures lurking beneath the surface. But even for the most seasoned wildlife officers, nothing could have prepared them for the discovery that would soon unfold beneath those murky waters. It began as an ordinary patrol. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission team was cruising slowly through the vast wetlands on a humid afternoon. The air was thick, filled with the buzzing of insects and the croaks of hidden frogs. For hours, nothing unusual appeared until one of the officers, scanning the surface with binoculars, noticed something strange beneath the still water. At first glance, it looked like debris, maybe an abandoned boat or a large metal container. But the longer they observed it, the more it became clear. The shape was too refined, too symmetrical. "That's not a boat," one officer muttered, leaning closer. "That's something else." The patrol halted, and the officers secured the area, stepping cautiously onto the soggy ground. Using poles, they prodded the submerged object, and a hollow metallic sound echoed through the swamp. Whatever it was heavy, and it was man-made. The mud and moss clinging to its surface gave away only fragments of its identity. A rusted hatch, thick iron plating, and small propeller fins at the rear. Could it be an old military vessel? Another officer suggested. Florida had seen its share of strange finds, crashed planes, forgotten storage containers, even illegal dumping sites. But this was different. The shape, the build, it resembled a small submarine. Realizing the potential significance, the officers immediately radioed for backup. Within an hour, the area was swarming with state troopers, Coast Guard personnel, and divers. A crane was brought in to hoist the object out of the swamp. Slowly, dripping with decades of mud and vegetation, the strange structure emerged and everyone could finally see it clearly. It was indeed a submarine, but not the kind used by any Navy or research team. This was crude, almost handmade, a small, rusty, improvised vessel barely large enough for 2 or 3 people. Weld lines were uneven, the metal thin and scarred with patches. Whoever built it had no access to advanced tools. Investigators were immediately intrigued. Why would anyone build a submarine in the middle of the Everglades? There was no ocean for miles, only wetlands, gators, and swamp channels. Something didn't add up. The more they looked, the stranger it became. There were modifications all over, strange pipes running along the sides, a makeshift ventilation system, and a reinforced compartment in the center that seemed intentionally sealed shut. And then they noticed it, the hull, damn it. A large crack on one side, possibly from pressure failure, corrosion, or collision. It told them one thing. Whatever this vessel was meant for, something had gone terribly wrong. The recovery team worked carefully, cutting through the rusted bolts and corroded locks until they could finally pry open the hatch. It took several attempts, the metal groaned and screeched under pressure. Then, with one final wrench, the hatch gave way. A thick stench of decay escaped, and the officers stepped back instinctively. One of them, holding a flashlight, leaned in to peer inside the dark cabin. Within seconds, he froze. His expression shifted from curiosity to horror. "You're gonna want to see this," he whispered. Inside the cramped compartment, half submerged in stagnant water, were 2 motionless figures. They had been there for a long time, their skeletal remains tangled in the confined space. Surrounding them were tightly wrapped waterproof packages, dozens of them, each sealed in black plastic. The eerie silence of the swamp was broken only by the sound of an officer's trembling breath. They had stumbled onto something much darker than anyone expected. The packages, floating among the remains, looked familiar to those with experience in narcotics enforcement. One officer radioed the sheriff's department. "We've got possible contraband, a lot of it." When the evidence team arrived and began counting the packages, the truth began to emerge. This wasn't just some bizarre experiment gone wrong. It was a smuggling vessel, a narco submarine. Each package, once tested, came back positive for high-grade cocaine. Over a ton in total, with an estimated street value exceeding $15 million. The 2 men inside, they weren't explorers or engineers. They were cartel couriers, men who had likely set out to transport their illegal cargo through hidden swamp routes, avoiding radar and patrol detection. But somewhere along the way, their improvised submarine malfunctioned. The ventilation failed, the hull cracked, and water flooded in faster than they could react. By the time they realized what was happening, escape was impossible. The eerie stillness around the swamp broke into a storm of activity. News of the discovery spread fast within hours. Agents from the DEA, Coast Guard Intelligence, and Homeland Security swarmed the Everglades site. What started as a local wildlife patrol had now turned into a federal crime scene. Floodlights illuminated the strange vessel as forensic experts and divers carefully cataloged every inch. Cameras flashed, drones hovered above. Officers in hazmat suits lifted the waterproof packages from the submarine one by one, stacking them neatly on the shore. Each was marked and numbered before being transported to a secure evidence vehicle. But while the drugs were shocking, the biggest mystery was the identity of the men inside. Their remains were fragile, preserved in the swamp's murky isolation. Forensic pathologists recovered identification fragments, a watch, a ring, and a laminated ID card half erased by water damage. The name on the card, barely legible, matched a man on a DEA watch list connected to a Mexican cartel operating out of Sinaloa. This was no random smuggling attempt. It was part of a larger organized network that had been adapting their methods to evade detection. Authorities had heard rumors for years about narco-subs, homemade semi-submersibles used by cartels to move drugs undetected through remote water. These vessels, often built in jungle workshops or coastal warehouses, were crude but effective. They could carry tons of narcotics across hundreds of miles, just a few feet below the surface, invisible to most radar systems. But this was the first time one had been found so far inland. The Everglades, with its maze of rivers and shallow channels, made the perfect hideout for such an operation. Investigators believe the plan was to offload the cargo onto smaller airboats that would distribute it across Florida before moving it north. But something went terribly wrong. The damage on the hull suggested an explosion or internal pressure failure. Experts determined that the men inside likely suffocated after their air circulation system malfunctioned. With no way to open the heavy hatch from the inside once submerged, they were trapped as water poured in. It was a slow, horrifying death, one that left the officers who discovered it visibly shaken. Inside the control panel, technicians found a GPS system and several coordinates saved on a waterproof tablet. These coordinates, once traced, pointed to a remote stretch of mangrove coastline, possibly a hidden construction site for more vessels. Federal agents immediately launched an operation to search the area, but by the time they arrived, the site was deserted. All that remained were scattered tools, fuel drums, and fragments of fiberglass, evidence that at least 3 more submarines had been built and launched from there. The discovery sent shockwaves through law enforcement. The cartels had evolved far beyond traditional smuggling routes. Meanwhile, forensic engineers carefully analyzed the recovered submarine. They estimated it was capable of traveling nearly 150 miles offshore, powered by a modified diesel engine, and could carry more than 2 tons of narcotic. It wasn't sleek or safe, but it was cheap, quiet, and deadly effective. The more the investigators learned, the darker the story became. Local fishermen began reporting that, months before the discovery, they had seen strange lights and noises at night coming from the swamp. Some recalled hearing engines running underwater, but they had brushed it off as airboats or illegal hunting operations. Now, those sounds made sense. Within weeks, federal agents traced several cartel-linked bank transfers to Florida-based shell companies that were quietly purchasing boat parts and welding equipment. It became clear that the men found in the submarine weren't acting alone. They were part of a test run. The failed mission in the Everglades had been one of their early prototypes. Others had already made successful runs through the Gulf. For Dale Henderson, the local farmer whose property bordered the swamp, it was chilling to realize how close this criminal operation had been to home. The Everglades had always been mysterious, but this discovery turned it into something far more sinister, a graveyard for those who tried to outsmart nature and the law. When the investigation wrapped, the submarine was towed out of the swamp under heavy escort. It would later be displayed at a federal training facility as a reminder of how far smuggling networks were willing to go. As one of the lead officers said during a press briefing, "The Everglades hide many secrets, but this one showed us that even in the most remote places, the truth has a way of surfacing." The swamp eventually returned to silence, the reeds swayed again, and the water rippled like nothing had ever happened. But beneath the surface, deep in the mud, the marks of the submarine's presence still remain, a silent reminder of greed, tragedy, and a mystery that only the Florida wild could hold.